Right. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Zaylor Stout, author of Our Gay History in 50 States, your LGBTQI plus history book that highlights your significant people, places, and queer facts on a state-by-state basis. I'm really excited for today's discussion. This is actually a special Facebook Live, so we're out of rotation on this. You know, we normally do our Facebook Lives on Thursday at noon Central Time, but based on everything that's going on in regard to the Armenian crisis, you know, I thought it was important that we get somebody to talk about this conflict, provide us some historical context, because, you know, we as Americans here in the United States, we can have an impact in regards to what's going on all the way on the other side of the world. So today's guest is Dr. Armin Samuel Armenian. He's an anthropologist and use he, him pronouns, and got connected with them through some amazing friends that I have in Southern California. So love the network. And he's actually in Australia. So you're going to hear a bit of an accent. So for those that love accents, this will be perfect for you. But as you may have seen in regards to the news, I know that I've seen it on multiple news programs and lots of posts, especially, I mean, I may be unique in regards to the fact that I know many Armenians because I'm from Southern California. That's where the third largest Armenian population is outside of Armenia, actually the second largest outside of Armenia, the third largest in the world. But there's this big conflict going on in regards to Armenia, Azerbaijan, as well as Turkey. And so I wanted to make sure that we got somebody that could provide us with some historical context in regards to all of this. So let me get out of this screen share so that we can see our guest. Welcome, Armin. Thanks so much for, you know, fighting the time difference and making yourself available for today.
Thank you for the invitation, Zaylor. It's my pleasure to be here.
Absolutely, absolutely. But first, let's hear a little bit about you because I'm sure folks are like, well, who's this Armin guy and why should I be listening to him? So give us a little background.
Sure. So I'm an academic who focuses on Armenian studies. My area of Armenian studies is in the treatment of LGBTQ community within Armenia, and generally people of a sexual orientation and gender identity that is different to what is considered mainstream in Armenia. So my research looks into the treatment of the LGBTQ community, especially over the past 2 years, since Armenia experienced a wave of democratization since their 2018 Velvet Revolution. I live in Sydney, Australia. I'm an academic here. However, I'm moving to California soon.
I know, California. Everybody goes to California.
That's right, sunny California, from sunny Australia to sunny California.
Right.
Primarily because my spouse's family lives there, so it's a great new experience and adventure. So I hope to be able to join the LGBTQ community in California as well.
Absolutely. Well, you'll be very, very welcome. There's a lot of us in California, and so you'll hopefully fit right in.
Thank you.
Yeah. So here's the thing. So it's funny. I was talking to a friend the other day. I was on a road trip, and then we started talking about the Armenian conflict, and I was like, yeah, it's like Armenia. And he was like, Armenia is not a country. And I'm like, yes, Armenia is a country. And I made him look it up and do a Google search. And he was able to find out that, yes, Armenia is a country. So would you mind providing us, and it was kind of embarrassing because he's an academic too and stuff. And so it was kind of surprising. But here's the thing. I mean, as Americans, I don't think we know as much in regards to geography as we should, as well as enough about, you know, what's going on around the world as much as we should. So would you mind providing us with, you know, the listeners with, you know, short history in regards to Armenia?
Sure. So your friend's comments aren't uncommon, and it has a lot to do with the issue of empire and colonialism that Armenia experienced over the past few hundred years, which led to its absence from the world stage. So Armenia's history goes back several thousands of years. We see the Armenian people in various old ancient texts. However, the territory of Armenia itself, we can place it back into the 6th century BC. So we talk about the creation of the kingdoms of Armenia, and these kingdoms lasted for about 2,000 years. And they were located in present-day Armenia and spanning the territories of present-day Turkey, all the way down to present-day Israel-Palestine. So we see an extended border for a short. It was really big, but that only lasted for 70 years because we all know that conquest isn't necessarily the best choice for any country.
Right.
So it shrunk back into its let's say normal borders, which historically bordered the Byzantine Empire. It was known as the Roman Empire's biggest enemy and biggest threat because it was so powerful. However, these 2,000 years of kingdoms and history came to an end upon the migration of the Turkic peoples into the area. And you basically saw both, very simply put, Armenia and Greece being shrunk into a smaller size on either side. And then we start to see the Armenian people under the occupation of various empires. So we have the Persian Empire, we have the Ottoman Turkic Empire, and then we have the Russian Empire later on. And it's primarily because of these three empires and the Armenians being split amongst the three empires that it lost its place in the international arena. And after this, we see especially what's most well known, I think, is the Armenian genocide. The Armenian genocide, which came about as a result of nationalism, a crumbling of empires, and World War I itself. You see this emergence of an independent Armenia for 2 years, from 1918 to 1920. On what was the Armenian territories within the Russian Empire. So it's a small part of what was the Armenian homeland, but it claimed independence. But then you see the Bolsheviks. So we know the Bolsheviks as the Russian communists, the Marxists who came in and they took over Armenia and incorporated it into what we know as the Soviet Union, which was for the next 70 years. And it was after those 70 years of being a member of the Soviet Union that Armenia regained its independence in 1991 and became the country we know today as the Republic of Armenia. So once again, I guess these 70 years under the Soviet Union, although there were meant to be individual republics in this union, the world knew it as Russia, kind of this overarching term. And then before then we see, although there was a short period of 2 years of independence, you see 500 years of living under various empires. So it's not uncommon for people to say, is Armenia a country? What was Armenia? Because unfortunately, we don't always look back into the fact that there was, kingdoms going back to the 6th century BC and these ancient peoples. We start to see the world as we know it today. So it's a small republic located in what's known as the Caucasus, and the Caucasus region, which is south of Russia. We know it to be east of Turkey and north of Iran. There's a republic that's been there for next year will be 30 years, and yeah, so it's now its independent state and has joined the world arena finally.
Yes. And I'll make sure I post a photo so people can see where it is on the map. It's always important to be able to spot this stuff. But you also mentioned the Armenian genocide, and I know based on discussions with my friends in LA, as well as the protests that have been happening, big, gigantic, humongous protests happening in LA for a long period of time. Like actually, right before my partner and I moved back here to Minnesota, one of the protests went right by the house, and we went out there with friends and stuff. And so, can you talk about the Armenian genocide and what's the issue in regards to it being recognized as a genocide? Because it seems that there's some conflict in regards to whether it should or shouldn't be recognized, which I would think all genocides should be recognized, but can you give us some context in regards to that?
Of course. It takes a great deal of morality and a great deal of responsibility for a nation to recognize its past crimes. No nation wants to recognize the fact that their forefathers or ancestors may have instigated atrocities within their own territory. So the Armenian genocide stemmed from, it was an ongoing thing, which generally the Armenians, as I was saying, were under the Ottoman Empire for a good 500 years, from when the Turkic peoples came to the region and created the empire. For a large chunk of that time at the beginning, for the several few hundred years, there was a real segregation of peoples. So you had various minorities within the empire, despite it being an Ottoman empire. So the term Ottoman is important because there was no emphasis on Turks, for example.
Right.
Everyone was an Ottoman citizen. However, there was a religious differentiation in a system that the Turks refer to as the millet system. Every population, religious and ethnic population, were under the administration of their own institutions, which reported to the overarching Ottoman institution.
Okay.
So the Armenians, for example, being an apostolic Christians, were under the authority of the Armenian Church in the Ottoman Empire. The Jews were under the control of their leadership. The Assyrians were under the leadership of their own, and the Greeks their own, and etc. The issue with this was that the Ottoman Empire's ruling legal system was Sharia law. So we're talking about an Islamic legal system in which non-Islamic people did not have the same level of rights within the empire, despite being citizens. So there are, it's known that in major cities, in cosmopolitan cities such as Istanbul, formerly known as Constantinople, you had various people wearing different colored shoes. So the Jews had to wear one colored shoe, the Armenians wore a different colored shoe, and the Greeks wore another one. So you had to wear them to be able to differentiate yourself. And this was primarily within the major metropolitan cities rather than the larger areas where the Armenians lived in the eastern part of the empire. All this changed. It became eventually increased rights were brought into the empire. People demanded rights, and the very last, the second last sultan in the Ottoman Empire, the massacres already began against the Armenians. Why? Because the Armenians were starting, this was a wave of nationalism which had started around the world. And the Armenians knew that, started to gain an understanding that, yes, hold on, this is our indigenous native lands. Why aren't we standing up for ourselves? And the requests weren't something insane. It wasn't about independence and all this sort of stuff. However, the message received by the Ottoman authorities was one of great danger for the empire. So what you see is in and around the Armenian genocide and the start of World War I, you start to see the Ottoman Empire losing territory around itself. So it's lost Serbia. The Greeks just gained independence. It's lost North Africa. It's losing parts of the Middle East. All of a sudden, the very heart of its empire being where the Armenians are stating is their indigenous land. So the Russians are attacking from one side, and the Ottomans are saying, hold on, these Christian Armenians are about to take the side of these Christian Russians. However, this was very, very, very incorrect. Why? Because many Armenians were loyal to the empire. This was a place they had lived for centuries. They spoke fluent Turkish. Many Armenians were, it was illegal within their own towns to speak Armenian and to learn Armenian. So many Armenians after the genocide couldn't even speak Armenian. They had to learn it from scratch. You basically have a period of nationalization in which this new young Turk government is fearful that their own center of their empire is about to collapse. They start to make claims, false claims, that the Armenians are taking the sides of the Russians. Sure, there was small segments. We're talking groups that were like revolutionaries and saying, you know, we need to understand our own future in this empire. It's about independence, but the majority weren't.
Yeah, there's always going to be a small group of people
always. There's someone
everywhere.
And it's natural. People are, it's a growing awareness. It's a time of great enlightenment and understanding. However, this pressure from allies, the allies who were against the Turks, the Ottoman Empire, it placed increasing pressure within the empire, and the Armenians were seen as taking the wrong side. So the authorities said, it's time to do something about this. And this is the main part of what was the start of the genocide, was that official documents were released saying the Armenians must be deported and exterminated. So despite age, gender, whatever it was, everyone needs to be exterminated. So many Turkish, let's say, people in authority in Turkey will say it was war and we had to move them to different parts of the empire. The issue with this is that there's so much overwhelming evidence that people were attacked in their villages and killed, not necessarily deported, and those who were deported were killed and massacred along the way of these deportations as well. So my own great uncle was hanged in the center of Istanbul for being a revolutionary. Any Armenian has numerous kind of family members who were in some way involved in the genocide. So this the government kind of initiated movement to exterminate a people. In much the same way, we see many Holocaust academics saying, sure, maybe it wasn't 6 million people in Auschwitz, maybe it was 4 million, maybe it was 3 million. The issue isn't about numbers. The issue is about it happened, exactly. If a government or an authority is saying we need to exterminate a people, then even if it was 10 people or it was 1.5 or it was 6 million, a genocide took place. So the reason why people aren't recognizing this is about, I guess, contemporary politics and relations with Turkey. We know Turkey is a NATO member. We know Turkey is a powerful economy in the region. It has a history since the time of the genocide of being a powerhouse in terms of geopolitics, in terms of resources. It also hosts a US an army base in the US, a US army base in Turkey, which has nuclear warheads on the base. So there's many issues that countries, when you look at the reasoning as, should I side with Armenia? Should I side with Turkey? There's economic incentives there that they don't want to jeopardize. The issue is that countries that have recognized the Armenian genocide, such as France, such as Germany, such as Italy, such as many South American nations, various countries around the world, such as Canada, when they made the decision to recognize the genocide, sure, there was pushback from Turkey, but that pushback didn't last very long. And this is where people are like, you need to take that stance and recognize these atrocities if you don't want them to occur again. And this is where I think today's discussion is super important, because we're seeing atrocities taking place and this narrative of genocide is being reawoken in Armenia.
Hey, and so it's my understanding, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that United States hasn't recognized the Armenian genocide. Is that correct?
Correct. But we have like a large number of states, if I'm not mistaken, apologies to the experts in the United States, but 40 plus states have recognized the Armenian genocide. But it's the federal government and the state governments are fantastic because they also introduce various kind of curriculums into the US education system in each state, which makes young Americans aware of what took place in order for it to be prevented in the future. But it's the federal government which stands behind Turkey at the moment as a NATO ally, despite growing authoritarianism in the country. So this is another issue.
Wow. So you know already that they're teaching they're teaching what happened in Armenia in some of the states in regards to school curriculum.
Correct. So there's various states. I'm not going to list them because I'm going to get them wrong.
But
as I read them, I know they passed them in. I think one of them was actually the latest one. I think, if I'm not mistaken, was Colorado.
Okay. Well, Colorado's on the more progressive side, so that doesn't surprise me. You know, and yeah. So awesome. And Colorado actually is one of the states that's approved the teaching of LGBT history in schools. So
there we go.
We have 5 states currently that do that. So no, I love the context that you provided, so that I'm positive that there's people that are going to be watching this and be like, I had no idea what the Armenian genocide was about, and so okay, I believe that we've had past presidents that have maybe said during the campaign trail that they were going to recognize the Armenian genocide, and then once they get into office, they didn't. So I'm got to put people on blast. Got to be honest in regards to what's going on, even if it's candidates I support. So do you have knowledge and information in regards to that?
I do. The Armenian community within the United States has become. I don't, very plainly said, I don't think they know who to trust in terms of the Armenian genocide. Once again, so many politicians, including President Obama, including, at the moment, presidential candidate Biden, they've all made statements to say they will recognize the genocide. It's part of their campaign promises
Yeah.
and various other things. Biden at the moment has said that he will provide further aid to the territory of Artsakh that we're going to be discussing.
Okay.
However, the community has a great issue believing politicians, which makes sense if so many in the past have said so. I think the biggest, for the Armenian community, the biggest hurt came from President Obama, because they genuinely believed that he would do it, being someone who was an educated president who really understood the rights of various peoples. So I don't think the community at the moment places great emphasis on the statements made, whether it's Republican or Democrat in the United States. It's seen as you're just saying this now to get a vote from a large, significant population of, let's say, California to begin with, but also other parts of the US. As to whether they'll do this, Hillary Clinton was one of the greatest it was one of the biggest disappointments for the Armenian community, because she came out saying that this is something that needs to be left to historians to understand and stuff. So these sorts of statements historically show that the person isn't willing to take the stance, and they're trying to say, let the historians look after this issue rather than politicians, when politicians are being paid the big bucks to make these decisions on behalf of the constituents they represent. So there is a distrust amongst the American Armenian population.
Have there been Republican politicians that have said that they were going to recognize it, or is it really the focus has only been on Democrats?
It's largely been Democrats, but it doesn't mean the Republicans haven't. There have been Republican representatives that have made similar statements, Trump being one of them. And of course, it fell apart as well, because whilst Trump is known, even within Australia, to be one who speaks his mind, it's not always the promises he makes. Again, it's him speaking his mind without thinking about or listening to the advice of his advisors around him as to why the US has such a position, why we don't change it. So again, once again, it falls into that trap of who to believe. We can't believe anyone. So it's all a matter of just showing the strength of the Armenian community and demanding that the US take this moral high ground and recognize the atrocity of these people, and realize that it's not necessarily going to jeopardize their relationship with Turkey in the long term.
Since it hasn't really jeopardized the relationship of any other country that's recognized it in the long term.
Correct. Correct.
Now, I know that you've done extensive research in regard to the LGBT community in Armenia, so I don't want to miss out on that, because I've never heard anything about it. So I'm going to be glued to my screen too. So what would you like to tell us in regards to that, and what came out of your research as it relates to the Armenian community, the LGBT Armenian community in Armenia? Yeah.
So Armenia has a like any country, has an LGBT community. Homosexuality was decriminalized in Armenia over 2 decades ago. It still remains a taboo in society. It's a very conservative society. The church still has a lot of authority and moral authority in the country, which the people listen to, despite the history of Soviet, atheist policies. Armenia's history is drenched in Christianity, being the first Christian nation. The people take great pride about this fact. However, the LGBTQ community has faced a lot of pushback from within the country, from institutions, from the government, and from society at large. The protests I was mentioning 2 years ago in Armenia in 2018, Armenia had this peaceful revolution, which was in the international press, but largely not so much. Why? Because one, it's Armenia, it's a small country, but secondly, because media tends to only focus on violent revolutions. It was a peaceful revolution where no one was hurt. And
they're like, oh, no news here.
No news here. Why should we care about people protesting on the streets? But the problem is this opposition leader, Nikol Pashinyan, he became the new prime minister by basically forcing out the old system, this old president who was becoming increasingly authoritarian in the country, and saying the people won't stand for it. And the army came onto the streets to join him. The police came, the clergymen came, every aspect, element of society came. This authoritarian government resigned, elections came in, and Nikol Pashinyan became Prime Minister of Armenia, and the entire parliament was kind of swept clean of corrupt factions. There are some left, but increasingly the country has moved towards democracy. Freedom of media is quite prevalent now in Armenia. But all this is connected to the rights of its citizens. There's something to be said about this revolutionary pie that exists in Armenia. Everyone wants a piece of this revolution, but what piece of this pie is there for the LGBTQ community in Armenia? You can't have a democracy unless the rights of all your citizens are looked after.
True.
So the Armenian LGBTQ community has become more active. Sure, there's still a long way to go. You can't join the military if you identify as LGBTQ. It's still considered a mental illness in the country. As a result, you won't be able to get a driver's license. You won't be able
driver's license?
Employment checks. All this is related to your mental health. So there's still big issues in the country. However, there is growing signs of, when I say growing signs of acceptance, the institutions are slowly being forced to change as the country moves towards democracy, moves towards European institutions. And in general, Armenians become more aware of the rights of all their citizens. But there's still a long way to go. But what's most interesting is the LGBTQ community's awareness of what's happening in Armenia at the moment. Naturally, this is their country. Their country is under attack. A lot of social media posts by the community have been showing their full support for the Armenian armed forces, for the existence of the Armenian nation. And this is support being shown by a community that's traditionally been pushed back, that's traditionally been said, you don't belong to the Armenian narrative. But what Armenia is experiencing at the moment is not a conflict. It's not a civil disturbance. It's basically a threat to the existence of the Armenian nation. So everyone is kind of putting in their support and giving their best.
Wow. No, that's it's kind of crazy that you can't get a driver's license or a bank account or anything.
So you get a bank account. It's just things like a driver's license might be connected to someone's mental health. Because, you know, naturally, if someone is suffering from a various some mental illness that might...
Like, I understand if you have like epilepsy or something, and then you're, you know, I mean, that's going to be something different, but wow, interesting.
Correct. So there's still a long way to go, but the influence of other countries in the region, primarily Russia, has been a negative influence in terms of LGBT rights.
Is the corporate world in Armenia, do they have any like influence in regards to things? Because I know that, you know, here in the States, you know, some of the companies stepping forward and saying this is what needs to happen, and you have this groundswell of companies saying no, this is what needs to change. For example, in North Carolina, they passed this bathroom bill so that individuals that were transgender had to use the restroom that corresponded with the birth on their birth certificate, as opposed to the gender that they identify with. We had lots and lots and lots. I mean, even companies that I wouldn't expect, like a Walmart and all that kind of stuff, saying that they're not going to spend money there, and that particular legislation ended up getting rolled back. So is there any type of impact or influence in regards to the public corporate world as it relates to what's going on in Armenia, or not at all?
Not at all. And the reason why is Armenia's economy isn't necessarily built on these large corporations. It's a small country. It's built on small businesses throughout the country. And a colleague of mine who's an American academic, her name is Tamar Shirinyan, and Tamar's research on the LGBT community in Armenia, she talks about this term called the family nation, and it applies to Armenia, in which the entire nation is your family. So your movements in public and your gestures and anything you do in public is directly related to each other, and people will comment on what you do in public. Why? Because everyone belongs to the same family within this one nation. Now, the negative side of this is that the narrative of what constitutes an Armenian is spread across the entire country, because someone's actions may embarrass the narrative of the Armenian nation, which is where the LGBTQ community comes in, because it doesn't form part of that narrative, and they're trying to push towards their inclusion in that narrative, to say it's up to us from these grassroots organizations to be able to instigate change. So in Armenia, the change that's coming about towards societal and institutional perceptions of the LGBTQ community is coming from the government. So it's coming from grassroots, but it's also coming from the government from up top, telling its institutions that you need to change the way you do things. So unfortunately, in terms of economy, in terms of corporations, the same level of influence, it doesn't have the same, impact in Armenia.
Well, there's goods and bads in regard to the influence corporations have over here, and I can tell you it's not all good.
No, definitely, yeah.
So there's the good parts, but then there's the not so good parts, definitely. So you're moving to California. So one of the questions I had in regards to that is, why are you moving back? Well, not moving back. Why are you moving to California in the States? And then the other question, because we kind of got into this a little bit when I was talking to you before the interview. What questions have your family and friends in Australia had as it relates to this decision, especially if you're concerned about in regards to the outcome of the presidential election?
Yeah, so it's a great question because we are glued to the TV about the presidential elections in the US. I know it sounds strange because most Americans would probably never watch a political debate in Australia taking place for our elections, but the reality is that America is Australia's big brother, is our biggest security partner in the region against any kind of external threat, and is culturally very similar to Australia. So there are great deep connections that exist. I'm moving to California because my husband grew up in Fresno, California. He's Canadian by birth, but he grew up in Fresno, and we thought it's a great chance to shake things up and go and live and spend some time with his family abroad after he's been living in Australia for 13 years now since I brought him here. And it's just a great opportunity. When you mention this to Australians, you very rarely get a positive response or positive reaction.
Like, why the hell are you leaving? Who would want to go to the United States?
Sure. And the unfortunate thing is media has a big role to play in this. We fail to realize that the US is an enormous country in which society is very different to one another in different states, in different, west or east or anything in the US. Most Australians will respond with, oh no, but what about Trump? And secondly, you're going to have to pay for healthcare. Things are not safe in the US, so healthcare, safety, civil disturbances, Trump. Australians have an issue with paying for healthcare because we have universal healthcare. We don't pay for, our doctor's appointments. We don't pay for surgeries. It's all part of having universal healthcare, which is what President Obama was trying to, work towards. It's a system that's never in doubt in Australia, and Australians are very proud of it. So the second we know we have to pay for our health insurance in the US, until you find a job, of course, it's a strange thing for Australians to understand. It's also the US is, I guess I have to make this thing. The US is an amazing country. It's known for its influence in the world. It's known for its entrepreneurship. It's known for its ability to change things around the world. But Australia is a very protected nation in the world. And we have, we don't pay for universities whilst we're attending. You pay
hear
after.
That, Americans? There's
Pardon?
other places that are doing it better.
So you do pay for it, but you pay for it once you start earning more than $50,000 a year. They take it out of your pre-tax income, which goes back towards the government. And so it allows everyone to attend university if you can. So there are issues that exist. However, it's not to be said that everything in Australia is perfect. We have a lot of issues ourselves, and California is a fantastic state to move to as well, from what I understand.
Yes, it is. I can vouch for California.
So it'd be a great experience being in what's the US is everyone says California. If it was an independent country, it would be already
the largest economy in the world, I think. Yeah,
correct. So the US has a lot to be proud of. The media focuses on the negative aspects of the United States and what's going wrong, without failing to understand that the US is where it is at the moment in terms of reputation and power and influence, because it's been the country that stood up for various peoples in the past.
Whew, knock on wood. Hopefully, good to hear that's still the perception, even after the last couple of years.
Of course.
But hopefully there'll be a transition coming soon. So turning back to Armenia then, and especially in regards to the current crisis. What's with this current crisis that's going on? Why is this happening? What's going on?
Sure. So this conflict, it's over an area of land, a region. If you look on the map, it's in between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And the territory is known internationally as Nagorno-Karabakh. So this Nagorno-Karabakh region, which is quite a difficult word to say most of the time, it's known to Armenians as Artsakh. So Artsakh is a word that's used in Armenian antiquity. So it was a region of the Armenian kingdoms going back, several thousands of years, and was one part of the Armenian kingdoms. And it's a region which has always been very heavily Armenian populated. So the region was passed to Soviet Azerbaijan. So not to complicate things, but when the Soviet Union was formed and Azerbaijan also became a part of the Soviet Union, the communists, the Russian communists, the Soviets, wanted to find a way to appease Turkey. Turkey was the neighbor. They wanted to find a way to bring Turkey in, to pull them away from their journey towards the West or Europe, and to incite them to join the Soviet Union or become a strong ally. And the way to do this was to give lands that were heavily Armenian populated and known to Armenians as Armenian lands to Soviet Azerbaijan. Now, why Soviet Azerbaijan? The Azeri people are a Turkic people. So by Turkic, I mean they have the same ethnic relations. They have this ethnic relationship to Turkey. Their language is a Turkic language. They're able to understand each other. They're Muslims, of course, as well. They differ in their form of Islam because the Azeris are Shia Muslims, while Turkey are Sunni Muslims. So Azerbaijan has a very strong historical relationship with Iran. However, by handing land to Azerbaijan, they were able to see if they can bring Turkey into the Soviet kind of sphere of influence. So land was handed, but the influence wasn't gained. We know that Turkey moved towards Europe, towards NATO, etc. The area of Artsakh continued to be Armenian populated despite efforts by Soviet Azerbaijan to bring Azeris into the area. At its height, the most Azeris that were in the area were 20%. However, it always kind of swung towards 90 plus percent Armenians. There was always some sort of conflict in the region. But under the Soviet Union, everything was kind of hampered and all sorts of differences were like pushed away. It was only towards the end of the Soviet Union when you start to see the crumbling of the Soviet Union. It was a period known as Glasnost. So Glasnost was this period where it was about increased openness and transparency within the Soviet Union. And this was essentially what led to also the crumbling of the Soviet Union. So this increased transparency and awareness. These people, the Armenian population of this region of Artsakh, began to say, hold on, we're already an autonomous area within Azerbaijan, within Soviet Azerbaijan. Let's vote to join Armenia. So they had an election and they voted overwhelmingly to join Soviet Armenia. So it hadn't crumbled yet at the same time. So let's join Soviet Armenia. The moment vote took place, and it was a peaceful vote. There was no violence. The Soviet Azerbaijan administration in Baku, in the capital of Azerbaijan, decided this was a major threat, and overnight these pogroms started in Azerbaijan against their Armenian population. So Armenians were being killed in broad daylight. Why? Because there was an understanding that their ethnic kin in Artsakh were trying to join Soviet Armenia. So this eventually basically spilled out into war. And the ceasefire, the war never ended, but the ceasefire in 1994 basically saw, and by 1994, let me remind, I guess, the viewers that the Soviet Union had collapsed. So there was an independent Azerbaijan, independent Armenia. The ceasefire meant that the region of Artsakh was under the control of the Armenian forces and the people of Artsakh, the Armenians of Artsakh. So then you see 30 years and 30 years of kind of like stagnation in terms of there's no real development as to what's happening. There was intermittent periods of kind of conflict So we saw one in April 2018, in which there was a 4-day conflict between Azerbaijan and the Armenian population of Nagorno-Karabakh, of Artsakh.
Yeah.
That lasted 4 days. Now, why is this happening now? Like, why did this erupt now? There's several factors. One is that Azerbaijan is an authoritarian regime. So their president has been president since, I don't want to get the date incorrect, but basically the mid-90s, when his father died and passed it on to him. So it's a family thing. There's not going to be, that's right, it's not going to change. There's no free media in Azerbaijan, which is unfortunate for the Azeri people. There's no, you can't have opposition to the government. Opposition leaders are frequently jailed. So this comes about at a time where this authoritarian leader, there's signs of kind of a crack in the authoritarian system, in which people are starting to voice concern as to why he's still president and what he's doing. This came about also because Armenia experienced this move to democracy. They have a super popular prime minister that the population all of a sudden, love. He was an opposition leader that was jailed himself numerous times in the past. Wow. But he became the prime minister of the country, and the country is opening up. So that's had an effect on Azerbaijan as well. So we start to see this nervousness by the president of Azerbaijan. We know Azerbaijan is a country of oil. So it sells a lot of oil. It has billions of dollars in oil revenue. So it's been building up weaponry, storing it. So it's time to also show off this weaponry, see what they can do. However, the biggest factor in this whole thing as to why it started is Turkey. Turkey, despite being a strong ally of Azerbaijan, has never historically shown its direct involvement in the conflict. It's tried to maintain this quasi-neutrality, but this time President Erdogan of Turkey, another authoritarian leader, is saying, it's time for us to take back what's yours, basically, to Azerbaijan. And there is this growing understanding that the war was pushed and instigated by Turkey as a way for it to show its influence in the region. Because it's traditionally a Russian-influenced region, but now Turkey is all of a sudden saying, I want this to be my region. So let's get a war which we can possibly lead to the extermination of Armenia altogether. So our biggest concerns at the moment is not only Azerbaijan's growing military threat, but also Israel's involvement in the conflict. Israel has been accused quite often in the past few months. It's known they sell large amounts of weaponry and drones and stuff to Azerbaijan.
Yeah, who else is selling arms there?
Exactly. So it's basically, Russia has sold weapons to Azerbaijan and Armenia in the past, but we're talking about huge weaponry coming from Turkey and Israel into Azerbaijan. Over the past 2-3 weeks, there's the number of flights going from Tel Aviv to Baku has been increasing daily. And we're not talking commercial flights. We're talking other cargo flights taking military. And the accusations are coming out now that the grandchildren of Holocaust survivors are selling weapons to the grandchildren of genocide perpetrators. So the moral responsibility of Israel is being called into question. Armenia's withdrawn its ambassador to Israel as a result of these, the weapons trade. So there's many people that have started this conflict from the outside.
Right. Is Russia still providing military resources to Azerbaijan too?
So Russia is continuing to provide weaponry, and a lot of weaponry into Armenia is coming from Russia and is coming via Iran because they're
playing both sides?
They're playing both sides, and Russia's been known to play both sides for quite some time because it enables them to maintain their power in the region.
Status quo, yeah. They don't want to see a rising Turkey.
Correct. They don't want to see a rising Turkey, which would be the deciding factor in this whole conflict. If Turkey does push onto Armenia proper, if we can say, so the internationally recognized borders of Armenia, Russia has an obligation under a treaty agreement, a security treaty agreement, to intervene. Russia also has a military base in northern Armenia. So it's at the moment, there is an academic, let's say, assumption that Russia is punishing Armenia at the moment for its move to democracy, for ignoring Russia. So it's saying, fight it out, see how far this can go. But they do understand that if it goes too far, Russia will intervene because it won't allow Turkey to gain strength in the region. The whole problem, like, Zaylor, the whole issue with the region is that it's all about geopolitics.
Yeah.
Israel's weaponry to Azerbaijan is basically to support a country which is having conflict with Iran, which is Israel's foe. At the moment, though, Turkey is very outspoken about Israel's occupation of Palestine, about various sorts of issues within Israel itself. So the leadership in Israel and Turkey have a bit of a standoff. So the question will come, as Azerbaijan becomes more closely aligned to Turkey itself, what position will it take in relation to countries like Iran or Israel?
Right.
So it's an evolving conflict.
So what's the international community doing, if anything, like United Nations? I mean, is anybody doing anything? Because here in the States, it's like nobody's expecting our government to do anything. I mean, we can't even handle COVID right, let alone helping other countries that are, being attacked across the world.
True. And the only reason we're seeing any news on the conflict in Artsakh is because of Turkey's involvement, and Turkey being a NATO partner, it involves a big power. So otherwise, you wouldn't have likely heard about it because no one talks about Armenia or Azerbaijan. The countries that have spoken up about it, France was one of the first. France is a historical ally of Armenia. It has Franco-Armenian ties going back to the year 1000 and stuff like that. So it's shown its support towards Armenia. It has a huge Armenian community in France and a very old Armenian community. However, the world has been silent. It's not in the American interest to support Armenia. Armenia is still considered a country under the Russian sphere of influence. So trying to convince politicians to support this democracy is very difficult. So despite the fact this country is a growing democracy and is being attacked by authoritarian countries, American politicians will consider, hold on, one country, Turkey, is a NATO member. The other country, Azerbaijan, has oil. Europe also considers the importance of oil coming from Azerbaijan. What does Armenia have to offer other than being a democracy? And this is, it's the sad fact is that when it comes to it, are we really supporting democracies? No, we're supporting our interests.
Wow. Okay. So much, so much going on. How can the U.S. government help? I mean, I know that I saw some reports that the Los Angeles, I think it was the Los Angeles City Council came out really aggressively in regards to trying to push for the either state of California or the federal government to do something and intervene. If you can talk about why is Los Angeles have the third largest Armenian population in the world, that could be anything. So there's lots to talk about. So let's get into that. Yeah.
So to begin with, the Americans have taken action. They've been sending humanitarian aid flights, so flights filled with basic equipment that's needed for medical care in Armenia. However, Turkey has closed its airspace to US humanitarian flights, so none of the aid is getting through into Armenia because Turkey is intentionally blocking.
And isn't there aid coming from somewhere else? Because I thought I read somewhere that there was aid coming from, that there was also aid that was coming from another country, not just the U.S., that was also being blocked by Turkey.
There's other aid coming through as well. There's definitely aid coming through from Russia as well via Iran, because Georgia, so to the listeners, Georgia is another small republic that declared independence at the time of the Soviet Union crumbling. It's north of Armenia, and north of Georgia is Russia. The problem is Russia and Georgia had a major conflict. So Georgia has closed its airspace to Russian planes flying into Armenia. The issue is they haven't closed their airspace to Israeli and Turkish planes flying into Azerbaijan. So this growing conflict continues. There is aid coming through, but it's limited. The Armenia is struggling at the moment to combat the increasing levels of harm towards its citizens and just general emergency procedures. just to talk about the American Armenian community and Los Angeles in particular.
Yeah.
So LA has in the Armenian world, LA
Mhm.
has a reputation. Every Armenian knows how many Armenians there are in Los Angeles. Um, Armenians in Armenia refer to Los Angeles as just this slang word, "los." So the three, the
Okay.
loss itself. The history of Armenians in Los Angeles goes back towards, we're talking about the mid 19th century. We're talking Armenians who moved from the Ottoman Empire
Mhm.
to the United States, and they settled in these areas of California, such as Fresno.
Mhm.
Fresno is known to have a very old Armenian community. They were farmers. The weather was very similar to the lands they came from.
Ah.
So agriculture was super important. These people eventually moved south and found this place called Los Angeles. And as the country became more developed, as the city became more developed in terms of Armenian institutions, its reputation grew as well. So whilst Los Angeles has the third largest number of Armenians in the world after Russia, after Armenia, and of course Russia.
Mhm.
Um, as a community or a diaspora,
Yeah.
um, Los Angeles is the largest outside of Armenia. It's
Wow.
difficult to categorize Russia or Moscow as having the largest Armenian diaspora, only because most Armenians that live in Russia are economic migrants who go
Mm.
there for work, but
And
their
then they go
residence
back.
is in Armenia.
Ah, okay.
It's not to say it doesn't exist. They do have a very old Armenian community in various parts of Russia. But
Mhm.
when you talk about a diaspora, what talks about
Mhm.
institution building and stuff, it's Los Angeles.
It's Los
And
Angeles.
we have to remember that a large part of the reason why Armenians made their way to Los Angeles following the 1950s was also due to, and I've written this down, was also due to the 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act that came about during the civil rights movement in the US. So we're talking
Yeah.
about pressure for the government to no longer discriminate against people from Asia, people from Southeastern Europe and various other places. So as soon as the civil rights movement erupted and these changes to legislation came about, it was at the same time as conflict in the Middle East. So
Yeah.
you're talking about the Lebanese civil war. You're talking about the Iranian revolution. You're talking about Arab nationalism. You're talking about the Israeli-Palestine conflict. All these areas had huge Armenian populations, and these Armenian populations and communities were ethnic, religious, cultural minorities. So
Mm.
they had very little sometimes to do with the majority population that were either, let's say, were majority Arab, were majority Muslim, were
Mhm.
majority Jews. They were different, kept to themselves, and they said, this is a time for us to move. Excuse my language, but the shit's hitting the fan,
Yeah.
and it's time for us to get out of here. Otherwise, we're going to be next.
True. I mean, true. Absolutely. Wow. This is
And
so
Los Angeles was this heartland. It was known as, this place to go.
This is great information. Holy smokes, I had no idea. Um, so what can Americans do? I mean, I know that you said that there's some humanitarian aid going there, but I mean, um, the question is yeah, I hate to say I don't see this administration doing anything. So hopefully there's an election and that happens where we change administrations, and so there could be a different set of eyes looking at our
Sure.
international standing, as well as fostering democracy, true democracy around the world, and making the tough decisions in regards to supporting democracy as opposed to some of these financial and economic interests. So give me some insight into the inside scoop on that.
Sure. And American citizens can make a difference. They can make a world of difference. Whether the next administration, even if it does change, will
Hmm.
make any difference is doubtful. But what happens is the American voice can make a difference. Americans have a history of being the people who have made a difference in the world. They've shown the world, they've shown the rest of the Western world that the individual voice does make an impact. So for Americans, raise awareness, read about the conflict, voice your concern to your local, in Australia we call them members of parliament, but to your congressional,
Yes, the congressional
members,
officials,
um,
state and federal, absolutely.
state and federal,
Yeah.
make it known that the issue is of importance. We're in a world where we increasingly have become very, we focus on one issue, and as humans, it's very easy for us to just focus on issues that matter to us.
Yep.
Very much similar to what we're talking about the Black Lives Movement. We're talking about various other global issues, whether it's genocides, whether it's persecution, whether it's occupations. As human beings, as Americans, there's a moral authority to stand up for those being persecuted.
Yep.
And it doesn't have to be an issue that's directly of impact to yourself, but one that you know that you can make a difference. So contact these representatives, contact the authorities and tell them that you do care, and also to put pressure on international partners of the United States. So to make it known to your representative that, you know, American allies are Turkey and Israel. Both need to be held accountable. We need to understand why Turkey, as a growing authoritarian country, is still a US ally. We do understand the importance of the military and NATO. We need to understand why Israel, as a country that has such a similar history, that understands about persecution, is doing what they're doing now in terms of selling deadly weapons. You know, we do understand the issue of economy. We do understand the issue of countries needing to improve their economies and keep things going. But it's also about moral authority and responsibility. As I said, Americans have a responsibility. Why? Because they've shown themselves to be the leaders in the world when it comes to making change and for standing up for those who are persecuted. So the time hasn't changed. It's time to stand up again and to show your support, and to show your support for democracy as well, and to prevent people from losing their lives, basically.
And when does that need to happen?
It needs to happen as we're speaking. There's no time to waste. Why? Because even though the current US administration is the way it is, it's also an important time to put pressure on them. To put pressure on them to say, you may win next time, but if you want our votes, at the time, it's important for you to consider what's important to us, not just about what's important to the US economy. It's a fine balancing act, let's say, but the Trump administration, we can't just push them aside, despite our personal issues with the administration. If they do win again, the voice of the American people has been heard, but we need to work. Sorry, Americans need to work.
You'll be here soon. You'll be here soon.
Maybe in a few years' time. Yeah, it's time for Americans to push to help improve that administration, even if they're against it.
Right, right. Really quick, I guess last question before we close, because I know we're getting close to the time, and I definitely want to be respectful of your time. So there was a ceasefire for a small window, it seems, but it seems that that's fallen apart. So tell us about that and where we are this minute today as it relates to the conflict.
It's difficult to label it a ceasefire when it lasted for 15 minutes. It's difficult when 2 hours leading into the ceasefire, the Azerbaijani military were shelling the capital of Artsakh. It's called Stepanaker, the city. They were shelling it heavily. A ceasefire doesn't mean you have X number of hours left to do as much harm as possible. The ceasefire ended shortly after, 15 minutes after it was called. Shelling hasn't stopped, and now there's issues with the shelling taking place in southern Armenia itself. Once again, this links us back.
Is that the most populous area?
It's not the most populous. So Yerevan, the capital, is in central west Armenia. It has its own separate defensive sphere around the capital. If there was to be any shelling or any violence in Yerevan itself or the surrounding areas, you'll start to see the big players in the region getting involved. But the fact that southern Armenia is being targeted is already a major concern, let alone the fact that Artsakh is being continuously targeted. What can be done? Once again, you need to raise your voice that what Azerbaijan is doing is against the, let's say, the rules of war. We know that Azerbaijan has been torturing prisoners of war and killing them. These are against the rules of international war. We know war is war, but at the same time, there are rules that have to be respected. The whole ceasefire was meant to be a humanitarian ceasefire in which dead bodies were exchanged. This is very gruesome, but there was dead bodies everywhere that people couldn't go and collect. Didn't happen because the ceasefire was broken within 15 minutes. So there's too much threat in the region for any sort of like ceasefire take place. And sorry, but it also shows Russia's weakening influence in the region. It was Moscow that brokered this ceasefire after something like, it was a huge hourly, like 9 hour something like discussion, and it didn't even last.
Well, Americans, you've been called to action in regards to speaking up in regards to this humanitarian crisis that's happening in Armenia. You know, if we're going to continue to be the beacon of hope for freedom and democracy and you know, equality, we need to ensure that that's what's happening around the world. This is a, you know, a relatively young democracy. You know, we're still a relatively young country compared to a lot of these other nations. But, you know, if we want to support democracy, this is a prime opportunity for us to be able to do that. And not just because there is a thriving LGBT community there that's fighting internally in Armenia for their own equality, which we're still fighting some of those same and similar fights here. But because they're human beings that just, you know, want to be free and be left alone and be able to live their lives and everything. So I challenge folks to share this Facebook Live, because it's a great educational information that Armin's provided to us in regard to this. I mean, so much was covered in this hour, so it's just awesome. And we may have to have you back if there's updates that we need to cover as it relates to the conflict. Hopefully, fingers crossed, you know, that there's something that happens where there's enough pressure that's put on either by international figures or you know, that the American government actually finally comes and steps in and says enough, and we use our influence in regards to trying to stop what's happening over there and the killing that's happening. But it's up to us to be able to speak up, because as you've heard from Armin, you know, people still around the world look to us and our leadership as it relates to this issue, and if not us, then who? So I want to thank you so much, Armin, for setting aside time for us today and being that anthropologist educating us in regards to all things Armenian.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me on your show. It was a fantastic opportunity, and I do hope that your viewers will take action and will make a change.
Yeah, and so I'll make sure that I hopefully I'll be able to tag you with the post on the Facebook post, so that there may be questions. Normally this is live. We're recording this early because Armin is in Armin is in Australia, and the time difference is so significant that we wouldn't have been able to do it at the Facebook Live time that we normally do it. So this is recorded. There may be people that have questions in regards to stuff. If there's anything that you want me to also post along with the Facebook Live, I can definitely do that. If you have anything you want me to include, I can definitely include that. But I really appreciate it, and hopefully I know that I'll be calling my elected officials, because I mean, Minnesota is a pretty progressive place, and so, you know, there's not a ton of things for me to contact my state senators about that I want to have changed on a federal level. But this is one where we can actually, you know, folks around the country, regardless of whether you're in a Democratic, Republican, conservative, liberal state, can push our elected officials to say something. And again, including sharing posts and everything about it on social media, so that other people can become aware of the conflict. Because I think that there's just a lot of people here that don't know much about Armenia, may never have met an Armenian before, and couldn't point it out on the map. So I'm gonna also include a map where we can see where it is, because I think that's important, the geography aspect, the geographical aspect of it. But providing awareness is really important and crucial.
With an image of Kim Kardashian and Cher on the side. as
See,
our two famous Armenians. That's right.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, and enjoy your weekend.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Enjoy your day.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.